Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I am Susan Ryan, the CEO of Aging In, and delighted that you've chosen to spend this hour with us. So I just want to invite you to utilize our chat box and introduce yourself in there. We'd love to see where everybody is coming from. Your name and such is just a way that we can kind of build that community of change makers. So thanks for putting your name in there. I want to give some context, just a little bit, to what we're doing today. At our Aging In conference in St. Louis this year, we had the incredible pleasure of hosting a small house summit. And in that, we really began the day with a panel of experts, those that have different areas of expertise, but passion about the small house, whether it be design, whether it be reimbursement, whether it be research, operational. And so today is part two in a three-part series. And so I am delighted to welcome our two experts today, Charlie Sabatino, formerly with the American Bar Association as executive director, but I've gotten to know Charlie through the COVID years and have appreciated his passion, his advocacy, and his wisdom that he brings to all things small house, and really advocating, as the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine did in their report, how important it is to have private rooms and small homes, households. So he's going to share a bit of his work with the Moving Forward Coalition and the work group that he spearheaded to really advance these small house household models more broadly. And you'll be hearing from him in just a moment after our first speaker, and that is Melissa DeStout. Melissa is with Perkins Eastman Architects, and I can say that I've had the honor of presenting alongside Melissa and really understanding the rich experience she has had in designing small house homes, and really understanding exactly the interplay between the design elements and that of operations. And her advocacy has been so appreciated in the work that we do. So I'm going to get out of the way and I'm going to turn it over to Melissa first. And then when she's finished, then Charlie will be the next speaker. And I would remind you, we've got a Q&A box down below next to the chat box. And I'd love if you've got questions during either of their presentations. We've saved some time at the end for questions. So please enter your questions into the Q&A box, and I will bring those up with our presenters after their presentations. So Melissa, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Susan. Okay, so as Susan mentioned, my name is Melissa DeStout. I am an architect and one of the leaders of our senior living design practice at Perkins Eastman. Today, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking with you all about what we see as the kind of the opportunities to create these conditions for physical change. So I'll start by talking through what we see as a person-centered design process, which I think hopefully has some words in there that you're all familiar with. And then using some examples, talk through those core design principles and how we've seen them applied in a variety of ways. These really are something that are very adaptable. And so I'll give you a couple ways that we have seen that implemented through a variety of our projects. And then touching a little bit on how we start to push that further and really are thinking about integrating well-being and community connections in a variety of ways as well. So to start, I know you're all likely very familiar with person-centered or person-directed care. And this is really the care being led by the individual, by the elder in many cases, so that it's personalized and it really meets people where they are, allows for that autonomy and really creating the experience that individuals are looking for. What we see is really important when we're designing small house homes is to take a person-centered design approach to meet that type of care. So when we're talking about person-centered design, it's again focused on the individual, being led by those who are going to be using and living in the spaces that we're creating. If any of you have undergone the design process, or whether it's your own home or somewhere that you work, you'll know that there's a lot of things that need to be considered. There's codes, there's there's technical requirements around systems, but really at the heart of all of that has to be the person that's being designed for. So that's why we really emphasize this person-centered design process. At Perkins Eastman, we really believe, let me go back a second, I'm a bit delayed there. We really believe that it's important to bring that knowledge, experience, and design expertise to every project that we do in order to change that perception and experience of aging. So what we're talking about today is that culture of change and how we go about it. So this is something that we see as the process that we can take in order to create that change in the places that we're designing. As you can see here, this process is an iterative circular process. It's not a straight line type of thing that we're doing when we're talking about person-centered design. The design that we see often has to start with this background of research and innovation. Aging in is a fantastic place to go to have that expertise, that knowledge around innovation and providing that research. Perkins Eastman also provides research, and there's a lot of opportunities, both when we talk about research, it may just mean going out to visit a lot of different communities to understand how others are doing things. But there's also a variety of sources of information out there. So we always start with that as a backbone. But really, when we begin every single project, the key part of this process is listening. And so it's about getting to know the people that we are designing for, really getting to the heart of who they are and what they need, and asking the right questions. So this can be something that you can listen really well, but if you're not asking the right questions, sometimes people aren't going deep with sharing who they are and what their needs might be. So this research and innovation helps us to be asking the right questions, and then we really get through to the design implementation. And so here it's really making sure that all of that, what we've learned through the research, through the listening, that gets implemented in the design. And then we are coming back and saying, did it have the intended effect? And continuing that loop. And with every design project that you do, there's always the opportunity to adapt and to evolve as you learn through what's been implemented. When I talk about asking the right questions, I want to talk through a couple of the questions that we like to ask to get a process started. And I think that this can really lead that person-centered design process by asking these types of questions, in addition to all of the standard, operational types of questions that need to be asked, but really keeping some of these answers at the heart of the design and really making sure that these are being considered as you move through the project. So that first question is, what does home look like here? And really specifically say here, because home looks different everywhere. It looks different for every person, but we like to start with what would feel authentic as a home in a specific location. If you're in a more rural or suburban setting, that might look like front porch living. Kind of see the image on the left there, where you've got the really welcoming and inviting front porch. You can see the tree-lined street out the front of the building. You can wave to your neighbors on the porch next to you. So really thinking about how are we creating a home that meets that kind of an atmosphere. The image on the right is also an image of an outdoor space in a small house design project, but this is in a more urban setting. So when we're looking to design in a more urban setting, home might look like a lot more shared community spaces where a lot of people are coming together to engage and share, just as you would in a downtown area where there's a community garden that everybody goes to. So really thinking about how home adapts in life, and then how does that translate that to a small house home design? The next really important question that we ask is, who lives here? We want to understand kind of the essence of the people who will call this place home. Now, that those people will obviously change over time. So part of the answer to this question is, how do we adapt to those people as they change over time? But you can see between these two images, there are a couple slight differences to just something as simple as the kitchen and dining experience. In one, there's really a more formal dining room setting where you have that community table, everyone's gathered around to eat their meals, but pretty traditional in that you've got the kitchen, although open and visible, and then that formal dining area right there, so that you have that opportunity to spend the time setting the table, really being intentional about the meal times. In the image on the right, it's a little bit less formal in some ways, where maybe you start to see that kind of eat-in kitchen feeling, where it's a little bit less formal, that there's just a couple folks who stop by, who sit in the kitchen, and then the dining room's in a little bit of a separate area, still open, still visible, you still have that connection, but you're starting to see a little bit of kind of some cultural differences that you might find when you really start talking to the people that you're designing for. This is wonderful when you have an existing community that you're working with, that you can actually interview, talk with, have conversations with the people who will be living here. But if that's not the case, it's always something where you can, do some research, understand who's in the area, to make sure that we really have a good sense of what is the local culture and some of the local expectations around that home design. And then this is one of my favorite questions, because it's sort of a way to turn a challenge into something really constructive and really positive for our community. And that's, what's keeping us from doing better? So, and I have a feeling that this is probably what started the greenhouse small house movement in the first place, is we all know where we want to live, right? We all want to live in homes. But as we age, there are certainly some challenges around providing care in a home. And so often when we are working on these types of designs, there's a number of things that can be challenged um, by the need to provide care. One of those, and I'll start with the image on the right, is access to the outdoors. There's always, when we talk about outdoor spaces, there's always the concern about weather and the elements. And can those doors to the outdoors be unlocked? Often when we get that pushback, the question is, well, why can't they? What is the concern there? A lot of times we hear that the concern is, well, I won't know if someone's out there. What happens if the weather's not good? How do we make sure that people are staying safe? Safety is often a big part of what's keeping us from doing better. So when we're designing, it's really about thinking about, how do we make sure that we're understanding those concerns and being respectful of them, because absolutely safety is important, but maybe thinking about, how do we position the outdoor space so that there is fantastic visibility from where the places that staff are often in the home, so that from the kitchen, from the dining area, from the living area, you have full visibility of the door to the outdoors and of that outdoor space. Sometimes what's keeping us from doing better is that we don't have the land to build the beautiful one-story homes that you sometimes see. And so we have to have a multi-story building. And in that case, maybe we feel like we can't have outdoor space at all, but you can see in this example, outdoor space can look like a screen porch, that's possible too. In that same multi-story condition, how do we have a front door? We don't have a front door. We're on a multi-story building. Maybe that the elevator is actually what's keeping us from doing better. In this example here, the image on the left is actually the front door to the household from the elevator lobby. So you really can still create those elements of home, and we'll talk through those core principles. Regardless of some of these challenges, it's just thinking a little bit differently about what's the challenge and how do we meet that challenge, address it, but still keep the kind of essence of designing homes in mind. I'm going to illustrate this through an example because I think that always helps to see a real life project example of how this has been implemented. And I love to share the Jewish home example in Rochester, New York, for a variety of reasons. First, the initial what's keeping us from doing better question was that they had 362 beds in this kind of legacy tower building. And part of that was just the density of the number of residents living together that was keeping them from creating the home-like environment that they wanted to create. Uh, Fortunately for them, they have a beautiful property. And so what we were able to do was to create new 3-story greenhouse homes on the site in order to reduce the census in the tower itself. And that allowed us to renovate the tower to create the households there as well, so that household style of living was happening in multiple different settings, which again created this great opportunity to meet people where they are. And they actually gave the elders the choice of, do you want to move to the greenhouse home, or would you like to stay in the renovated tower? And a number of folks actually really enjoyed the community that was here and chose to stay here. They actually asked the same question to their team members, the staff as well, when they were making this move. So I find that really kind of the full extent of what we consider person-centered design, all the way from beginning to end. So the resulting 3-story greenhouse homes you can see here still have a lot of those elements of home, but in that 3-story configuration. If we dive into that floor plan and what those spaces are, we talked about that front door. You see the image here again. This is the elevator lobby. So that front door can be customized, can be tailored, and really still creates that experience so that when someone walks in, there is that true feeling of I am in someone's home. Right when you walk in, you're not walking in and seeing corridors with resident rooms along them. You're walking in and seeing this hearth living room, just as you would in your own home. You walk into a more public space within the household. And so creating the variety of environments, listening and understanding that there was a desire to have, a spot for games, puzzles, community, but also a great crossover space for staff as well. And that living room area. So all really combining, creating those types of home and community spaces. And then directly adjacent, and you can see here where that view to the outdoor space is happening, is that dining and kitchen area. And so having that opportunity to have that, again, at the heart, you can really see that these design elements are really right at the center, and that the elders' rooms are circling around the outside. So everybody has beautiful views in short walking distances, but still that bit of privacy from kind of that main front entry and living experience. What's really wonderful about keeping these core design principles in mind is that they can be applied to a variety of conditions. So this is the floor plan of that tower we were looking at on the overall site plan. And what we've done here is really taken those very same design elements, but applied them here in the multi-story existing building. So when you come off of the elevators, you can see all the elevators here right at the center. You can either turn to one side or the other and see a front door at either side. And so again, you have that experience of entering into someone's home. And again, those spaces that represent kind of that core home where you might bring a guest, where you spend a lot of your time, are right at the center. So having the kitchen and dining, having the living and the hearth and the den, all right there. And then the more private resident rooms spanning down along the wings. What's very cool here is that there are endless variations on how this can happen. A few years ago, we actually did a study where working with Aging In, where we interviewed and talked through how these core design principles were applied at a variety of different communities. And you can see that there's many, many different ways to accomplish this. And it really goes back to those questions that we talked about at the beginning. You can see that, this example in John Knox Village is a multi-story, really a little bit more of a condensed setting that allows you to create these households in a place where maybe there's not quite as much land available as there is. It's where you can see this Clark Lindsay Village example. So there's endless ways to do it, and really some exciting opportunities as far as creating that. All of which, though, you see those core elements at kind of the most basic level, where the entrance and those shared spaces really centered around that spot. And then the resident rooms, the spaces where those elders have their own private space, circles around. Another example that's in a more urban setting is the Keswick in Baltimore, Maryland. And so in this case, as you can see from this site plan, they are fully built out in the area that they have. There is no opportunity to expand to new greenhouse homes and then renovate the existing. But some of the great parts about it is that they're in a really vibrant area, very near to Johns Hopkins University. So there's some great opportunities for connection that comes with a more urban location. But the first thing that we did is start with some research, really looking at what exists and what's more typical, and really understanding where the challenges are with the existing constraints of this existing building. And then we looked at how is this space configured, and what really is keeping us from doing better here. So as you might often see in a multi-story nursing building, that nurse station is right at the center, visibility everywhere, kind of sees the coming and going, sees everywhere, but that's the focus. The care is the focus of the community. And then there's a dining area that's really pretty multi-use. It has to do a bit of everything, but with that clear visibility from the nurse station. And then the resident rooms really flanking all of that. What's key to this that was a big issue, both for that they flagged immediately and that we recognize as well, is that because the entry is here and nurse station, dining, everything is kind of centered from here, everyone walks by. You get off the elevators and you walk by resident rooms, which is really not an experience that anybody wants. That even when you're at a hotel, a lot of people say, I don't want the room by the elevator. So really thinking through what's that experience for those more private spaces. And then, this entry, you're just you walk out and you're there. There's no transition space that was occurring in the existing building. What we look to create instead is to do exactly, implement those principles exactly as we talked about in the prior example, with a very clear entry and with those support spaces, those kind of shared community spaces, all centered around that, and the resident rooms in a more private area. So you can see the first impression is now focused on this living room with a 4-season room off of it. The dining and the kitchen areas are off to the side that allow for that connection and kind of still at the heart. However, something really fantastic that we were able to do because of the way the building was configured was to have kind of that back door. When we talk about a single family home, it might be the door through the garage where you bring your groceries, where you take out your trash, so that that doesn't all have to go through the front door. We had a great opportunity for that here. And then creating these more private zones for the residents to live, and being able to actually increase the size of those rooms a little bit by reducing the number that we had here. And then locating that support space really strategically. So it truly becomes that the care is the support, that it's not the focus. The focus is the living in the home, and the care is positioned so that it can be done efficiently, but really is intended to be that support element. And again, creating that clear sense of entrance so that everyone really does understand when you are walking into someone's home. Now, this project is still under construction. It is a phased renovation, so we don't have some finished photos yet, but you can see here the shift and the transformation that we're making. So this is that living area right at the center, which used to be the nurse station, and now in this exact same location, instead of walking down a hallway, you're coming in a front door, and there is that living area that we're creating there. Just across from that living zone, what used to be kind of that multifunction dining space, is now kind of a secondary small scale living setting that has what is intended to feel like a porch off of it. This was a challenging one where we didn't have the opportunity to actually create a true outdoor space. But so instead, we looked at how do we create the experience of being outdoors, looking at those large windows, the ceiling fan, the outdoor furniture. So really giving that variety of living experience within a home to the extent that was possible. And then that dining area. So you can really see that relationship to the kitchen, seeing where the food comes from and how it's prepared, and having that relationship with people who are working on serving those meals to you and creating those meals for you, but also the openness and the connection to the living area. We don't have the opportunity to have that great big grand great room, but we can still have those moments of connection. When we talk about well-being and really thinking through what that means and what that looks like, a key part of it for every small house project that we work on is really the connection to the outdoors. Wellness takes many fronts, right? In your home, often wellness has to do with movement and getting outdoors, whether it's seeing to the outdoors, having that natural light, and hopefully actually spending time outdoors. Due to the nature of a lot of these projects, it really has to be an intentional focus to create those outdoor spaces. And so both of these examples that I just shared actually were very intentional about creating that outdoor living where there were opportunities to do so. So in the 3-story greenhouse homes that we created at the Jewish home, there's this beautiful garden space that's located at the lower level that all 3 households have access to. Because it's at a lower level, it's often more of a scheduled activity to come out, or accompanied guest type of thing. However, it created a really fantastic opportunity to have that community between the 3 households there. So really, when we're talking about these outdoor spaces, they often have that ability to bring people together. Just the same, see what I know at my own home, we have the parties in the cul-de-sac where the whole neighborhood gets together. And that's sort of the same thing that we're creating here, is that opportunity for everybody to get together and spend time together. At the Keswick, we took advantage of what was a programmatic need, which was to create a covered connection between 2 wings of the building, so that if an elevator went down in one side of the building, there was a way to get across and have that accessible means up and down through the other part of the building. This gave us the opportunity to create a beautiful outdoor space that, again, was that place for connection, both for team members working there as well as for the residents living there. And then this idea of connected living, another really unique thing that happened at the 3-story greenhouse homes was that we heard, when we talk about who lives here, we heard that the people who lived here really enjoyed the time they spent together. They loved having the small setting, but they wanted to have that opportunity for broader gatherings. And so with every set of 3-story homes, we created this community space that has direct access to that garden. You can kind of see peeking out behind there, but really thinking about what does community look like for the people that are living here. And one last example that I think illustrates another way of this happening. This is another multi-story small house where you have the elevator lobby at the center and the household entry here. It has a direct, actually, bridge connection over to the independent living apartments in this community. And we created an amenity, a shared amenity space on every floor. So it's got great access to those living in these households, those in this more skilled care setting. But it also is a draw for those in the rest of the community to come over. You know, we create these beautiful spaces and you have more of those opportunities for connection. So sometimes it is that old adage of if you build it, they will come. This is a way to create, if you create a beautiful space that meets a need in the community, you will bring people together. So ultimately, this is really what we are driving for. We are looking to meet that person-centered care with person-centered design. Hopefully these examples gave you a little bit of inspiration into how that can happen. And now Charlie will talk a little bit more about policies around that.
Thank you, Melissa. When you quit sharing, I can get in. Okay, here we go. Hi, I'm Charlie Sabatino, and I want to talk about some survey work we did on small household incentives. There was a question that comes up when you hear from experts like Melissa. And we phrase the question this way: what would facilitate or incentivize the transformation, in whole or in part, of nursing facilities from institutional design to the small household design? We know there are barriers there because, of the 15,000 nursing homes out there, the great majority still follow an institutional design model that is really been bound to a design model based on hospitals of the 1960s and 70s. And nursing homes are so structurally and financially and operationally and by regulation so bound to that model that it's not easy for them to transition to do the kind of things that Melissa has been so eloquently talking about. So we began this process with this question, and it involved a process that lasted over 2 years. We started out with an online survey to help identify facilities that have transitioned or were in the middle of transitioning, were planning on transitioning from an institutional to a small household model, in whole or in part. And we were able to get the survey out there with the help of organizations such as Leading Age and ACA. And we received 82 responses from 25 states. Now, there were only about a dozen states that were really in the process that we were looking for. So we selected those for follow-up interviews with key informants from those facilities, and learned a lot of things. But one of the most important things we learned was that state policy incentives and effective advocacy were really key to opening up the door for this happening. So we decided we needed to look at state policy. And we had from the surveys identified a number of state policy people in more innovative oriented states. And we use what's called snowball sampling to expand that number. Snowball sampling is kind of it's a non-random sampling method in which the initial participants identify other participants through their professional contacts and networks who fit what we were looking for in the study. So that expanded the number of folks. And we invited those folks to take part in a series of online discussions to share what they had done in their state, what kind of barriers there were, what we might think about in terms of facilitating or incentivizing transitions to the small household model. And we researched states through online and other research sources that we learned had taken promising steps, and we created profiles of those states. And while we were doing that, there were some concurrent efforts going on through the Moving Forward Coalition. There was a project undertaken by Weill Cornell graduate students who did a literature review and a state policy review to complement what we were doing. And there was a financial modeling effort through ATI that Moving Forward had worked with. But the effort in looking at states that had taken innovative steps produced really only 12 states that really were doing something that was tangible. And this chart, which I'll walk you through, first identifies the kind of incentives that they use. One incentive was, you might call it pay for performance, or basically meaning adjusting payment for private rooms and private bathrooms attached to those rooms. We looked at the states who had done that, and we really found only 6 states, although I must say Kansas is in parentheses because it didn't quite, it didn't specifically incentivize through financial measures private rooms, but it did have a financial incentive for home environment domain, which reflects a philosophy consistent with a small household model. And I described that as the elimination of nurse stations, and greater privacy and personalization in shared and private spaces. So it sort of indirectly incentivized private rooms, but not directly. The other states that are shown here, Arizona, Colorado, Minnesota, Ohio, and Wisconsin, did build in a private room incentive. Now, these incentives work within usually a formula, a complicated formula that builds in incentives for all sorts of different things. So in trying to identify the amount of the incentive, it is not exactly a consistent number for across facilities because of the complexity of the formulations the states use in developing overall incentives. So the amount of the private incentives that are listed here in the second line are approximations. The only one that is definite because they decided to apply a flat nominal amount is Ohio, which incentivizes a facility that switches to private rooms with private bathrooms at the rate of $30 per resident per diem. And if they move to private rooms but they're shared bathrooms, it's $20 per resident per diem. So you can see there's a variation here, but even in states that didn't provide very much, Arkansas started out at $5 per resident per diem, and Arkansas is now, I think, maybe the state that has the most small household models in it, at least through greenhouse census numbers. So it doesn't necessarily take a large amount, but the problem with the private room incentives is that the real cost of doing this is in the huge capital cost in transforming an existing institutional style building to a small household model. Doing the kind of transitions that Melissa was talking about ain't cheap. So if one really want the ideal incentive, it would be both an incentive for features of the small household model, and we're only using the private room here as one example of a feature, but it would also target helping with capital expenses. And only 2 states that we found have done that, and they were both very recent legislative attempts in Massachusetts and New York. And neither of those are really off the ground. In New York, it became part of litigation challenging the law that it was a part of. The litigation wasn't necessarily challenging these capital loans, but it was simply because it was folded into a larger law that's being challenged. It's held up in litigation. And Massachusetts has not yet developed regulations, and that's even being slowed down further because of the many federal changes causing anxiety at state levels about meeting costs of all sorts of programs across the board. So those are two examples, and the legislation themselves are useful to look at. Other avenues have been creating standards that open up the door to the small household model, because many nursing home regulatory standards are really based upon, kitchens that meet institutional requirements, hallways and nurses stations, and all these things that make a hospital-looking institution. So a number of states, five of them, have developed standards that identify what the small household model is and identify features that will pass muster in terms of their design. Typically, trying to do a residential style kitchen where you can actually cook in and residents can participate in is impossible with any institutional regulatory schemes. So you really need to loosen those things up in nursing home standards, or in one case here where it says building code adjustments on the left. That's the mode that Florida used. It didn't change its nursing home standards per se, but in its building code, it incorporated features of the Facilities Guidelines Institute, or FGI, which has what I would consider pretty innovative design standards that are held out as a model to states. Most states, at least 2/3 of them, use parts of the FGI standards, but these standards get updated about every 3 years or so, and most states have not kept up to date with the most current standards. Florida is incorporated, I think it's the 2022 standards, and they're actually new standards that will be out soon, which would be great if a state like Florida then incorporated the latest version. But that's one avenue states could look at for examples, is the Facilities Guidelines Institute, as well as these examples of the states who have actually adopted small household standards, most of which approximate what we think of as greenhouse homes, but not 100%. And finally, a few states have tried to open the door to design changes by changing the Certificate of Need program. Most states have had, not all, but most states have had some kind of moratorium on giving certificates of needs for building new nursing home beds. A couple of states we found, Connecticut and Rhode Island, created an exemption that allowed states to utilize beds that were given up because of facilities closing, or beds that were turned in because they simply couldn't be filled, the certification for those beds. And to the extent that those numbers of beds were available, they allowed facilities to turn those into small household model designs without having to go through the Certificate of Need process. Again, that helps ease the way, but unless there are financial incentives, it's not easy for states to change. And finally, the last thing I wanted to mention very quickly are the states that have changed their standards, the kinds of things that they include in them. In terms of the size of facilities, the number of people per living area in these, well, it's really 6 states. Wisconsin is, I'll explain what the difference is there. You can see that the numbers vary from 12 people per living unit to 20 persons per living unit. And that's pretty much the norm, although I'm aware of facilities that have as few as 8 people in my own community, and some as much as 35 that have tried to adopt features of the small household model. Wisconsin is a little bit strange in that it does give that incentive for private rooms, but in terms of the number of rooms, it simply says it has to be less than 50 per facility. It doesn't talk about per living area. The other states that listed here, those numbers are per living area. So on one floor, you could have 3 areas, for example, with 14 residents in each household. That makes Wisconsin somewhat of an oddball in this chart. Most of these states address having private bedrooms, although they don't require 100% of them to be private bedrooms. That would be unrealistic. Most of them have some kind of percentage. California example says at least 50% have to be private. And other states will have different percentages higher than that. Private bathrooms is part of most of them. Florida does not require that. Private bathrooms can be defined in a couple of different ways, having a sink and toilet only, or having a sink, toilet, and shower facilities. And that's another variation. All of them, other than Wisconsin, address enabling open-style kitchens that residents can access pretty much 24/7. Meals can be cooked there. Some small house facilities have a central kitchen, but then they bring food to the residential style kitchen for final preparation and for eating. So, facilities have to do what is possible to do given given the basic structures that they have and the basic regulations. And finally, these states also address alternative worker models. We're talking about design, brick and block design, but the small household model also places a big priority on having alternate worker models, which are either allowing universal workers as they're used in greenhouse homes, or versatile workers that allow workers to take on different kinds of duties. The goal of all of that is to ensure that there's a more consistent and steady presence of the same workers in the facility so that they can develop meaningful relationships with clients. So finally, my last slide, what are some of the takeaways from the survey? Well, one is that relatively few states have considered ways to incentivize the small household model. We only found 12. Now, there could be other states out there that we overlooked. I can't say that we were perfect, but we certainly put a lot of energy into fleshing out states that have done something. Even fewer states have addressed the challenge of capital conversion costs. Actually, none are doing it right now. 2 have created the legislation to make it happen, but those are not off the ground. Thirdly, to be effective, states really need to address both the financial side through incentives, preferably both on a per diem basis and on a capital basis, and on the regulatory side to give a clear pathway to how to design facilities to open up the design opportunities beyond the institutional design. Fourth, what's really missing here are a whole range of incentives that states commonly use to promote other policy goals. States use temporary or permanent reductions in income taxes or real estate taxes or business state taxes in order to incentivize goals such as increasing low-income housing, energy conservation, business development, or educational opportunities. These are common in every state, but nobody has used them yet for incentivizing the small household model. And that's something that advocates and policy people really need to start focusing on. But on the positive side, while most of the strategies described in these profiles are modest, they do represent great starting models and valuable first steps for other states to look at and to learn from and to build upon. Now, the outcome of our research is going to be in a report of some sort. We did this with a work group through the Moving Forward Coalition. Our work has been compiled and turned in, and the coalition leadership has been making a decision on how best to publish it and make it available, and hopefully that will be done soon. So stay tuned for how to access this information so that you can use it in your policy and advocacy work. And I'll stop there because I think we have time for questions.
Well, thanks, Charlie. And Melissa, I'm going to welcome you back now. I'm just so struck by both of your presentations and so grateful for you sharing your wisdom and kind of the expertise that you bring to our conversation. I just wanted to let you know we've got an international audience. I was just struck. I can't believe someone from Australia has joined us this afternoon. I won't even do the math on what time it is there. But we've got folks from Canada, from Belgium, and many places across the US. So, with that, Melissa, I'd say this first question would be for you, and it's really talking about the how you employ the universal design principles in what you do.
Yes. So I think what's really fantastic about designing for senior living and the expertise that we bring is that what we find is that this really aligns well with universal design, because what's good design for our elders is often good design for all of us. And so maybe some examples of that is when we're thinking about the kitchen design, particularly in these open kitchens. We're looking at different heights and elevations of things. We're thinking about what's the reach range for not just our elders, but for the care team members who are providing their care, for their family members. And so really being thoughtful about that, about where a handle is located, things like that, about what the transition between the carpet that you have in your living room to the tile that's in that kitchen is, having that really be seamless. Those types of design considerations at the detail level ends up really benefiting everybody in these spaces. At a broader level, thinking about how do we make things visible and welcoming, that's something kind of a little bit bigger picture on the universal design, so that you know what opportunities there are. You can see where you want to go so that you have that confidence. Again, at all ages, for everyone, is really some of the ways that we create these more inclusive environments.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And as I have seen many of your environments that you have created, it's amazing to me what you have been able to do with existing infrastructure to take those traditional buildings. I mean, as you shared the case study with the Jewish Senior Life in Rochester, New York, it's just a beautiful example of how you can really create those smaller environments that we know matter in private rooms. So we don't have to always do greenfield construction or start from scratch.
Right.
So let's see. I see another one has, what is the next step, Charlie? This is for you, for the Moving Forward Coalition with this work. How will it be shared, and what can providers do? What is your call to action?
Well, I can only say what I would like to see happen, because the coalition is a coalition of many people and organizations, and we have a steering committee that makes the final decision. So, I mean, I would like to see it published in a readable format. We have a draft that is also being reviewed by better editors than I am, and it may be. I mean, a likely way of publishing it would be on the Moving Forward webpage. I would love to see it sent to every state nursing home regulator in the country, if possible, as well as to all the affiliates of Leading Age and ACA and any other advocacy groups we can think of, AARP. All of them would be interested in it. And, when I have talked to members of the industry, particularly through their associations, be it Leading Age or ACA, they all think this is a great idea. But they said it's just impossible financially unless there are some incentives to make it happen, because we can't put the millions of dollars into, we don't have that in our back pocket to do this. I should mention, that there is a federal component to this, which we're not focusing on in this webinar. But one of the biggest players in nursing home construction and rehabilitation is HUD, and anything at the federal government right now is question mark. But HUD insures mortgages for nursing homes, either building or rehabbing their facility, and by insuring them, they enable the nursing homes to get a lower rate, and there's a whole process for applying for that, and they have a portfolio in the millions, if not billions, that they hold. And we have talked to them. Another arm of our work group, which I was only a small part of, worked with mortgage financiers, organizations, and with HUD, trying to come up with some suggestions for how they might change the program that is the most common program, the 232 program, to build in some incentives in the program or to make it easier for people to utilize that source of financial help to build the small household model. And they were very receptive, but there has been no action. And part of that may be politics in general at the federal level is hard to decipher these days. But in the long run, it would be ideal to see our efforts at the state level be combined with efforts at the federal level to build real incentives that make this an opportunity. Because otherwise, we are just glued to this institutional model in a way that nobody wants. There are places that people don't want to move into, and there are places that people don't want to work, and that makes no sense.
100%. And so I really do appreciate you saying that. And I think our advocacy efforts are important, and that in your call to action to really, we've got to put this kind of information out there for others to really take advantage of. And I will say that, we're going to be looking at the small house and making the case for it from a business perspective in our webinar that's upcoming. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But to really make the case for quality, for what people want, but then to really analyze it from a cost perspective, that if we can do it to improve quality, we can do it at a cost that's generating these outcomes. It's what consumers want. Why wouldn't we do it? So Melissa, here's one more for you. Why should an organization work with an architect firm that knows small house design? Why is experience in small house design important from your perspective?
We'll say probably the biggest issue that we often see is that there's a really careful balance between the home qualities of home that come with the small house design and still providing the support for the care setting. And what we often see when we work with designers who aren't as experienced with this type of design is that the design can shift a little bit out of balance in one way or another. And it really does impact the feel of the home in the long run. So if you're not really careful about how you're providing for all the necessities of the care atmosphere, so the care environment, the soiled utility rooms, those kinds of supportive spaces, if you're not really careful about how those are implemented, it can take what is kind of looks like a home, but maybe doesn't function like a home. And so thinking about that one example that I shared at the Keswick of where the back door is, so that there really is a place for some of those things to happen and to come and go, that just supports the residential setting, but doesn't really influence it and kind of skew it toward more of that care setting.
Well, and I can certainly say yes to everything you've just said. We have a tool, how to select an architect, because to your point, to really understand the linkage between the care, operationalizing it to make sure that person-directed living can occur there. And from a functionality perspective, how do you really operationalize it for efficiency, but to really promote those beautiful values of person-directed living and an empowered workforce in that small house design. Well, we have come up to the top of our time together. It is such an honor, Charlie and Melissa, to be in partnership with you. And I can't tell you how much I have appreciated working with both of you, presenting alongside, working in work groups with you, Charlie. We really are grateful for the work that you are doing to advance our mutually held goals for a better world out there, utilizing kind of the small house model and person-directed living. So thanks for joining us. And to our international guests and others across the U.S. that are here today, just to let you know a bit more about what's on the horizon for Aging In, on the next slide, you will see upcoming. From Blueprint to Reality, this is the webinar I alluded to earlier. We have none other than John Ponte. He is the proud owner operator of greenhouse homes, oh gosh, over 70. And he's going to really explain a bit more about his experience, what he has done to really make the small house work. And then our good friend Dee Cato in Atlanta, Georgia, in an urban environment, what he has been able to do to really incorporate the small house model to support people living with dementia. And again, this is, making it work from an operational perspective, but making it work from a financial perspective. That's on December 4 at 2 p.m. On the next slide. We are having a summit, Reimagining Aging in New Orleans in January 21, 22. And this is where we're really going to get down and we're going to really unpack, what does it look like? We have Julie Harris and Michelle Shank. They are leaders of Louisiana's Culture Change Coalition called LEADER, and they're going to join us to talk about culture change more broadly. Aaron Kolb, CEO at Poitras Homes. They've got 6 greenhouse homes there. John Ponte will be joining us in person there. PMD Advisories, Michael Starkey talking about the market feasibility. Our friends who have supported us in the rebranding process with Aging In, Cynthia Thurlow with Third will be joining us there. And there are many more that are, we are just waiting for their confirmation, but we hope to see you and plan to meet us in the charming New Orleans in January. Next slide. Elevate Elder Care. And here you can see that we have had a podcast where we've really talked about the power of the household model. We've had many conversations with people that really are propelling these bold ideas. I want to invite you to listen to tomorrow's episode. Tomorrow's episode will feature former CEO, I should say, Bob Chapman. Bob Chapman has created an amazing, Barry Waymiller was the industry he was in, but he's created something called Truly Human Leadership. It's a place where leaders are equipped to really lead in a fashion that takes the book that he wrote, Everybody Matters. It's an amazing book. He was our keynote speaker at this year's conference, and he really has kind of a methodology around equipping leaders with what they need to be able to see each person within their care as somebody's precious child, and what we do as leaders to really raise them up and to be able to accomplish things, both from a business perspective, but really from a deeply human perspective. And the next slide, I think that's it. So thanks once again. I noticed New Zealand has joined us, Australia. To all of you, thank you so much for your time, your attention, and we wish you well for the rest of your week. Take care. Thanks again, Charlie and Melissa.